Hello, I'm the Theorizer, and today we'll be discussing the alternate timeline repercussions of Shrek 4, and I'll be tying it to my 3 amazing theories on the Fairy Godmother. I love explaining paradoxical temporalities, so here we go. So Rumpelstiltskin is a key component of Shrek 4, whose alterations of prior instated timelines results in plot holes, which today I shall explain away as hidden lores. In my past 3 videos on the Fairy Godmother, I delved into everything and ripped a massive conspiracy out of these films that runs deeper than anything superficially expected. However, I made all 3 videos before even uploading the first one, so I was caught off guard when a couple of commenters noticed something interesting. It was something that they saw as counter-evidence to my theory, but I pinned their comments because in actuality their evidence proved my theory outright. It was quite simply this. In Shrek 4's alternate timeline, Shrek was never born. Fiona later explains that without Shrek to save her, she simply got tired and escaped the tower on her own. However, guess what? Charming never showed up afterwards anyways to save her. In Shrek 2, Charming showed up right after Shrek, and this odd timing was prime evidence for my Fairy Godmother theories, but now there's objective proof that the Fairy Godmother wanted Shrek to save Fiona. Shrek's non-existence caused her plan to collapse, so she never sent in Charming. Ultimate proof. But these commenters saw this as counter-evidence because it messes with the 4th movie's timeline a bit. And as I've said in very old Shrek theories of mine, the 4th movie's timeline contradicts itself, and the counter-evidence doesn't break my theories, it just breaks the 4th movie altogether. So now, after 2 years of thinking over the alternate timeline, I'm finally here to put an end to the plot holes, and guess what? It all miraculously ties in with my 3-part Godmother theories. So first of all, the reason she wanted Shrek to go to begin with was a reason she didn't like. Even with her tarot cards, she could have altered the outcome, but she chose to keep Shrek because he was the quickest route she foresaw, because she needed the king and queen to avoid taking Rumpel's deal. The sheer and utter coincidence of them literally beginning to sign his contract and a dude comes crashing in with the news of Fiona's rescue is staggeringly timely. The Godmother needed a quick solution so that the king and queen didn't disappear and fracture her plans, so she begrudgingly picked the future she foresaw that involved Shrek. The timing is utterly perfect, and it also explains her extra hatred of Shrek in the movies. He was a necessary problem she now wanted to eliminate. If you can recall, I discussed how the Fairy Godmother, also known as Dama Fortuna, was most likely an old-fashioned kind of witch, similar to that of which we see in Shrek 4. All of the green, kind of pagan ones. So what if I told you that there's a good chance we are shown the Fairy Godmother's backstory in Shrek 4? I believe she used to live in this trailer park before her self-upgrade. She was always a lot like Rumpelstiltskin, a fortune teller who'd grant the wishes of people she preyed on. I almost feel like Rumpel was the one who took up the torch of scheming blackmail after the Fairy Godmother left the trailer park. Them knowing each other would explain a lot, such as how the Fairy Godmother knew about Rumpel's deal with the king and queen, which she put an end to via Shrek saving Fiona. So what about these massive plot holes and timeline repercussions I keep going on about? Well, to deal with all of that, we first must establish what exactly Lillian and Harold's contract did to them. It vaporized them, and it clearly did something that the Godmother was horrified of. The contract makes use of the word disappear, and as Rumpel said, it was a play on words. In order for all of the king and queen's problems to disappear, I believe it simply made them disappear, so their problems would go with them. They faded like Shrek, meaning there might have been a temporal change going on, and simply making them vanish cannot give him legal rights to the kingdom. No, he planned this for ages, hence his insane revenge on Shrek. The past probably was changed by this contract they signed, and remember, they're his contract, so he can remember all of the timelines that are created. In fact, I think he was shunned by the previous royals as well. You know, Lillian's family. And God knows how old he really is. He's like a fundamentally mutated witch, sort of like Dama Fortuna. Maybe the Fairy Godmother got her ideas of making people's lives miserable from him. He's a more intellectual salesman, and we actually see him convince people that their lives suck. he ruins lives too. Do you think it was any coincidence that Shrek's days felt repetitive at the beginning of Shrek 4? I bet Rumpel had some hand in all of it. Anyways, why do the timelines mess with the movie? What are these plot holes? Well, I'm sorry if what I'm about to discuss gets confusing because I'm about to explain around the counter-argument brought upon by my commenters. I'm about to explain the reason they think their evidence works against my theory rather than with it, and why that doesn't exactly work. Okay, here we go. Their argument was a question asking why Dama Fortuna didn't send in Charming anyways to save Fiona. The answer is because Shrek never existed due to Rumpel, and Dama Fortuna, a tarot reader, noticed this timeline fracture. In the parallel universe, she ceased all areas of her original plan and began to rework it and have Charming save Fiona differently, but then Harold and Lillian vanished due to their contractual disappearing deal with Rumpelstiltskin. As I stated, their crowns may have fallen onto the ground, but it's likely that Rumpel was subsequently transported to this parallel universe the minute that happened, though we didn't see it. But guess what? Because the Fairy Godmother didn't try to stop Rumpel, and we've established that there's a chance they knew each other, this means there's also a possibility that Rumpelstiltskin had deals he made with the Fairy Godmother, and Shrek signing the contract in the fourth movie not only resulted in an alteration upon the histories of Harold and Lillian, but it also messed with the past of Dama Fortuna. This leads me to then question how they know each other, which is what I will get into now. I first of all believe that, to some extent, the Shrek book character known as Dama Fortuna wasn't simply translated into the Fairy Godmother character, but part of Fortuna was also translated into Rumpelstiltskin, or rather the creepy witch side of Fortuna. Logically, this would tie the Godmother and Rumpel's backstories together on a fundamental level. I think one of them got their powers from the other. Now, I would say that Rumpel wished for a bunch of contracts and magic ink, but based off of the Fairy Godmother's backstory I established, it only makes sense that she would turn to him in her time of need, wanting revenge on the previous royals that wronged her. So if Rumpel made a deal with the Fairy Godmother, perhaps she failed to sign it because she suddenly learned of Harold the Frog being in need of saving. However, in Rumpel's altered timeline, Harold vanished with Lillian, meaning the Fairy Godmother had nobody to blackmail. So in the past, she signed a deal with Rumpel to exact revenge on the royal family in some other way, leaving her completely segregated from Fiona and the original plans in that old timeline. I don't think Harold and Lillian were never born, though, because then Fiona would have ceased to exist in the alternate timeline as well, which she did not. Where did Lillian and Harold go then when they disappeared? I don't know, probably a subsequent alternate universe, but more on that in 30 seconds. So in the alternate timeline, Rumpelstiltskin gave the Fairy Godmother a massive increase in powers, leading to her being the juggernaut of magic she is in Shrek 2. Rumpel's a sneaky little thing. He seems to remember all timelines he took place in since they are his contracts. What's weird, though, is the fact that the ogre tribe from the parallel universe seemed to engage in a dance sequence with Shrek during the credits of Shrek 4. They also captured Rumpel, leading me to believe that it was him who granted all of their memories back. Then the final question is, if all of this happened in the alternate timeline and everything still remained, though without the Godmother's interference, why do Harold and Lillian mention her in their carriage? And who cursed Fiona, if not the Godmother? I am so sorry, but here's where things utterly spiral into complicatedness. I doubt you'll be able to follow along, so please watch this video several times. These two remaining questions are left, which means there's yet another timeline, the one we see at the beginning of the film, where Lillian and Harold never signed, but the Godmother did. Back in the past. We never see this timeline where all three parties sign their contracts that I'm discussing. Let's call the original Shrek timeline number 1, Shrek 4's alternate timeline number 2, and this big other one we never see, where the Godmother signed her way back in the past, number 3. Number 1 has no complications, but number 2 starts to get weird because Harold and Lillian sign and disappear. So why didn't the Godmother go to save Fiona? Because Shrek's non-existence gave her no opportunities for further manipulation. My theory is that she went back to Rumpel, signed a contract, and this put her into the timeline where Harold and Lillian didn't exist even prior to when they would have signed the contract, giving the Fairy Godmother the powers required to dominate the kingdom, which failed as Rumpel used her contract and magic against her, and after killing her in timeline number 2 and 3, took on the kingdom as his own. Oh, I love the multiverse. Especially when there are 3 universes, the third of which only theoretically exists, until the second universe throws a villainous fairy into the third, therefore legitimizing the third and causing 2 and 3 to merge. large after a Rumpel deal that was supposed to happen years ago in Timeline 3 ends up occurring in the future in Timeline 2. I even think Rumpel was the one who suggested to the Godmother to make Fiona an ogre, after all. In Timeline 2, we see that he knows fully well about her curse, more than he should know from reading a damn children's book. Shrek. Give me more, baby! I'll squeeze the lore out of this thing until there's nothing left but basic dimensions. Until next time, I'm the Theorizer.